pain, anger. Hard to understand how a person that's supposed to be a protector and a father to those girls would have done something so hideous. It's just a lot to process right now.
15 days. That's all the new year had given this family before it took everything from them. And the man standing on that sidewalk had just lost his sister and his niece to someone who was supposed to protect them. So how does a family that seemed completely fine, no police reports, no restraining orders, no history anyone could point to, end up at the center of one of the most devastating events their neighborhood had ever seen? Before we talk about what happened on Lurley Avenue, let's talk about who this family really was. Because this wasn't just a headline. This was a household full of life, daughters borrowing each other's things, a mother who showed up at every school event, and a family that their community rallied around the moment they learned something had gone terribly wrong.
100 feet away from my home is really scary. This idea, because anything can happen, and the fact that it happened in one household, it can happen to another household. So I just praying for them.
Roxana Rodriguez was 48 years old. She was the heart of this household, the kind of woman whose presence filled a room with warmth without demanding it. Details about her professional life haven't been made fully public yet, but the people who knew her described her consistently the same way. A devoted mother, a fixture in her community, someone who showed up for her daughters, for her neighbors, for anyone who needed her. She had lived on Lurley Avenue long enough to put roots down, long enough for this neighborhood to feel like hers. She was not finished. She had decades left to give. Her younger daughter, Sienna, was 17, still in high school, still in that particular stretch of life where you're trying on different versions of yourself, figuring out who you are, what you love, what kind of person you want to become. Friends and family who spoke to reporters after her death remembered her as bright and kind, and they remembered how close she was to her older sister. And that sister was Desiree Alvarez, 19 years old. She still lived at home, that particular stage of early adulthood where you're between two worlds, one foot inside childhood and one foot stepping toward whatever comes next. She was asleep that morning when her world ended, and when it ended, she was the only one still standing. Now, what's really sad about this case is that by all accounts, Lakewood is a safe place. Quiet streets, neat houses, families feeling secure, the last place you'd expect something like this.
Obviously, this incident is a tragedy to the city of Lakewood. Lakewood is one of the safest cities in LA County. Definitely going to affect our community regarding this tragedy. But like the lieutenant said...
But on the morning of January 15th, 2026, all of that quiet would be broken. To be fair, there was nothing that day, no weather event, no community crisis, no visible sign that suggested it would be anything other than ordinary. Desiree was asleep. That detail matters because it tells us something about when this began. It was early enough that a 19-year-old was still in bed, still in that deep morning sleep that only gets interrupted by something loud enough to pull you out of it. She was pulled out of it by gunfire. Inside the home on Lurley Avenue, something had shifted. Roxana and Sienna were both there, whether they were awake, whether they were in the same part of the house, whether either of them had any warning. None of that has been disclosed by authorities. What the investigation confirmed is this: both were shot in the upper torso, and both were pronounced dead at the scene. By the time Desiree was fully awake, her father was in front of her. Hector Lionel Alfaro was 52 years old. Her father, the man who was supposed to be her protector, and he was armed. He raised the weapon. He fired at her. Multiple times. Every single shot missed. It isn't clear from the investigation whether Hector intended to miss, whether his aim failed him, or whether Desiree moved in a way that saved her own life. What is clear is that she survived, physically unharmed, and she would carry what she witnessed for the rest of her life. After firing at his eldest daughter, Hector turned the gun on himself. He died in front of her, and then Desiree did the only thing left to do. She picked up a phone and called 911.
Friends say this is a picture of 48-year-old Roxana Rodriguez and her 17-year-old daughter, Sienna Alfaro. They were found shot to death in two separate bedrooms of this home on Lorelei Avenue in Lakewood. Roxana's husband and Sienna's father, 52-year-old Hector Lionel Alfaro, was found dead in the den of the home. According to sheriff's deputies, the couple's 19-year-old daughter woke up to gunfire just before 8 o'clock Thursday morning. She told deputies her father shot her mother and sister, tried to shoot her several times but missed, and then turned the gun on himself, taking his life in front of his daughter.
Desiree gave the dispatcher everything she had. She told them what had happened. She told them her father had shot at her, and she waited. When deputies from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department arrived at the 5800 block of Lurley Avenue, they found her outside the home, distraught. A 19-year-old standing in front of a house that was no longer what it had been the night before. Inside, investigators found Roxana and Sienna, both gone. They also found Hector, dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. 2 firearms were recovered from the scene. Authorities have not disclosed the types of weapons or how Hector had obtained them. There were no signs of forced entry, no indication anyone other than the family was involved. This was a contained act of violence, beginning and end, inside one home in the span of minutes. The medical examiner performed autopsies on all 3. The findings were consistent with what Desiree had reported. The investigation was classified as a murder self-harm. And because Hector died at the scene, there was no arrest to make, no charges to file, no courtroom where anyone would be held accountable. The system didn't get the chance to intervene. It was over before anyone knew it had started, so the only question now is who was Hector Lionel Alfaro, and how did a man described as the head of a close-knit family become the person who tore that family apart? As mentioned earlier, Hector Alfaro was 52 years old and had lived in Lakewood with Roxana and their daughters. He worked. He supported his household. His brother-in-law, speaking to reporters in the days after the shooting, described the family as close-knit, and the speed with which neighbors and extended family rallied around Desiree confirmed that. These were not people on the margins of their community. They were woven into it. There was no criminal history involving any member of the household that has surfaced in subsequent reporting. No prior calls for service to that address. No documented domestic violence. No restraining orders. No public record of any conflict serious enough to involve law enforcement. Not once, not ever. That is a significant fact, and it cuts both ways. On one hand, it means Roxana and her daughters were not failed by a system that ignored their cries for help. On the other hand, it means there was no mechanism, no file, no flag, no open case that could have put anyone in a position to intervene. Hector presented to every person outside his home as a functioning husband and father. Investigators examined his background after the shooting. They reviewed his finances, his communications, his recent activity. They looked for the thing that would explain it. The fracture point, the breaking moment, the pressure that had been building without anyone seeing it. As of this reporting, they have not released a motive. The absence of a motive is one of the most unsettling parts of this case, and it raises a question that researchers who study familicide, the killing of multiple family members by a single perpetrator, have been grappling with for decades. Most perpetrators in cases like this are men. Most use firearms, and a significant portion have no documented history of violence before the act itself. Some plan it in advance. They come to see their family as an extension of themselves and decide that if they are going to die, the people bound to them must die too. Others act in a sudden break, a moment where despair or rage collapses into something irreversible before anyone around them has time to respond. In either case, premeditation or impulse, the result is identical. The violence comes first. The understanding, if it ever comes at all, comes after. We don't know which category Hector Alfaro belongs to. We may never know. What we do know is that he had access to 2 firearms, that no one outside his home was aware of whatever was happening inside it, and that on the morning of January 15th, he used that access in the most devastating way a person can. Mental health professionals note that men, particularly, are far less likely to seek help when they're struggling, not because the struggle isn't real, but because the cultural expectations around strength and self-sufficiency make asking for help feel like failure. Depression in men often doesn't look like sadness. It looks like withdrawal, irritability, a flattening of engagement, changes that are easy to explain away, easy to miss, and that don't trigger a call to a crisis line. None of that excuses what happened on Lurley Avenue. The choice Hector made belongs entirely to him. But it is a reason to think about the people in our lives who seem fine, the ones we don't worry about, the ones we assume are handling it. Sometimes they're not. In the days following the shooting, the community around Lurley Avenue responded the way communities do when they're shaken by something they didn't see coming. Neighbors expressed shock. Family members gathered around Desiree. A GoFundMe campaign was launched to support her because a 19-year-old who has lost her mother, her sister, and the father she thought she knew, and who is now the sole surviving member of her immediate family, needs practical support as much as she needs anything else. His brother-in-law spoke to reporters outside the home. His words were unpolished in the way that real grief makes words.
Luckily, she was a survivor of this tragedy. And it's just trying to deal with the consequences of their father's doing. Pain, anger, hard to understand how a person that's supposed to be a protector and a father to those girls could have done something so hideous.
He wasn't describing a man he had always feared. He was describing a man he hadn't seen coming. And that distinction, that gap between who Hector appeared to be and what he did, is what makes this case impossible to simply close and move on from. There is no verdict here, no sentencing hearing where Desiree could stand in a courtroom and speak her truth directly to the man who took everything from her, no moment of formal accountability. By killing himself, Hector ensured that whatever answers existed died with him. He ensured there would be no trial, no confrontation, no public reckoning. Whatever he was carrying into that morning, he carried it in silence, and he took it out of reach. That is its own kind of cruelty. Desiree Alvarez is 19 years old. She went to sleep one night as the eldest daughter of a family of 3. She woke up as the only one left. She has already done the hardest thing most of us will never be asked to do. She made the call. She walked out of that house. She spoke to the deputies who needed information from her at the moment when she had nothing left to give. She has let the people around her, the extended family, the neighbors, the strangers who donated to her GoFundMe, carry some of what she's holding. None of that makes her okay. None of it repairs what was broken on the morning of January 15th, but it says something about who she is, and it says something about what survival actually looks like, not as triumph, not as resolution, but as the act of continuing when continuing is the only option left. As we remember Roxana Rodriguez and Sienna Alfaro, not just for how they died, but for how they lived, one question has to be asked. How do we reach the people who are struggling in silence? How do we build a world where someone in crisis feels able to reach for help instead of reaching for a weapon? Where the people around them know what to look for? Where the warning signs, even the quiet, invisible ones, don't go unseen until it's too late? This case doesn't fit the usual narrative. There's no villain to prosecute, no system that visibly failed, no turning point where someone could have stepped in and changed the outcome. Just 2 lives ended, and 1 life irrevocably changed inside a house on a quiet street in a neighborhood that was supposed to be safe. Roxana Rodriguez, Sienna Alfaro, a mother and her daughter. They deserved more ordinary mornings, more of the life they were living, more time. Remember their names. If you or someone you know is struggling, help is available right now. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is free, confidential, and available 24 hours a day. Call or text 988 from anywhere in the United States. Sadly, this wasn't the only family murder case in 2026. Another family annihilation also grabbed attention because of its shocking brutality, becoming one of the worst massacres in recent memory.
Thus far in 2026, this is the deadliest mass shooting in America.
On January 9th, 2026, a brutal massacre tore through Mississippi. The level of brutality was so extreme that police officials stated without hesitation that this case fully warrants the death penalty.
There's some cases just that they've got to get the worst punishment. If he's eligible, we're going to go for the death penalty.
With that in mind, one question still hangs in the air. Who could do something like this and why?
But I try to do all I, can to help her, to save her. But I couldn't. And that's weighing heavy on my heart.
For starters, Cedar Bluff is not a city. It isn't even an incorporated town. It is a rural, unincorporated community tucked into the western edge of Clay County, Mississippi, roughly 125 miles northeast of Jackson, surrounded by fields, woods, and mostly modest homes along dirt roads where families have lived for generations. By all accounts, this is the kind of place where a neighbor's name is known before their face is seen clearly, where church attendance on Sunday is not a social choice, but a community anchor, where people are measured by how long their roots go down, not how high they have climbed. It is not the kind of place where things like this happen. And yet, the victims at the center of this case were not strangers to one another. They were, in every meaningful sense, a family. So, let's take a moment to know them. Because they deserve to be remembered as people, not as entries in a case file. Glenn Moore was 67 years old, a father and a grandfather figure in that community. He was a man who had spent decades in Clay County, raising children and building a life on that stretch of road in Cedar Bluff. Quentin Moore was 33 years old, Glenn's son, a brother, a young man still in the middle of whatever life had ahead of him. Willie Ed Gins was 55 years old, an uncle, a man who was present in the lives of his family, close enough to be at the family home on an ordinary Friday evening. Reverend Barry Bradley and his brother, Samuel Bradley, had traveled from Columbus to spend the weekend at the residence attached to a small church, the Apostolic Church of the Lord Jesus, a congregation with ties to the Moore family. Both men were found with fatal gunshot wounds. And then there is the name that stops everything, Makilia Guinness. A second grader who was at her own home with her mother and her siblings when the night turned into something no family should ever have to survive.
There's just not enough words to describe the pain that LaShonda Gewins must be dealing with. Little Makayla was so happy, so bright, and full of so much joy, and she brought so much life into their home. And now this family is left to deal with a loss that no one can understand. Now, LaShonda Gewins was actually at that home when everything happened. They lived on Blake Road. It was a place the family felt safe. It was their sanctuary. But that peace was shattered just last night. Now, LaShonda's cousin, Derica Moore, is accused of murdering her daughter. LaShonda says she actually saw her child die right in front of her other two children, a heartbreak no mother should ever have to experience.
I can't help but to feel like, I could have did more, but I tried to do all I, can to help her, to save her, but I couldn't, and that's weighing heavy on my heart because it might have been more. What if I did this and what if I did that? It would have been, a better outcome. But I just don't know. I tried.
Now, let's talk about the man at the center of all of this. Because if we are going to try to understand what happened on January 9th, 2026, we have to know who Derica Moore was before that night. And the uncomfortable truth is, we do not know very much. Not officially, anyway. What is confirmed is this. Derica Moore was 24 years old at the time of the shootings. He grew up in Cedar Bluff, Mississippi, the same small, tight-knit community where every one of his alleged victims lived. He was not a newcomer. He was not an outsider who drifted in from somewhere else and brought chaos with him. He was local. He was known. He was, by every official account available, a young man who had managed to reach the age of 24 without a single documented run-in with the law. No juvenile record, no adult charges, no court appearances of any kind. For law enforcement, that is almost as puzzling as the crime itself. Sheriff Eddie Scott confirmed it plainly and without hesitation. There were no prior reports involving Moore, no calls to his address, no complaints filed against him by neighbors or family members. No incidents that had ever brought him to the attention of local deputies in any capacity. In a community as small as Cedar Bluff, that kind of total absence of a record is notable. It means that whatever was building inside Derica Moore, if anything was building at all, it stayed hidden. What is confirmed, however, is the timeline and the events leading up to it. It started at a mobile home on David Hill Road, a dirt road in the western part of Clay County. This was the Moore family home. This was where Derica Moore's own father lived. At some point that Friday evening, 3 men were shot inside that home. All 3 were found with gunshot wounds to the head. Glenn Moore, 67 years old, Derica's father. Quentin Moore, 33 years old, Derica's older brother. Willie Ed Gins, 55 years old, Derica's uncle, who was visiting the home that evening. 3 men from the same family, shot inside their own home. When it was over, Moore took the keys to his brother Quentin's Ford F-150 pickup truck and drove away. He left all 3 of them behind and headed down the road. Not a single 911 call had been made yet. The rest of Cedar Bluff had no idea anything had happened. At 6:56 in the evening, the first 911 call of the night came into Clay County Emergency 911. Deputies arrived at 7:03. 7 minutes later, the call came from Blake Road, just a few miles from David Hill Road. This was a cousin's house, another home Moore knew well, another family member's front door. According to Sheriff Eddie Scott, Moore forced his way inside. In that home were his cousin, her mother, and 3 young. The sheriff confirmed that once inside, Moore attempted to commit sexual battery while armed. That attempt was stopped. Moore then turned his weapon on the in the room. He shot at. Her name was Makilia Guinness. She was pronounced dead at the scene. She died in her own home, in front of her mother and her brothers and sisters. He then pointed the same gun at another child in the room, a younger than Makilia. That child survived. To this day, investigators cannot fully explain why. Whether the gun misfired or Moore made a different choice in that moment, nobody knows for certain. Sheriff Eddie Scott, a man with 30 years in law enforcement, stood in front of reporters afterward and said something that no amount of experience could have prepared him to say. I don't know what kind of motive you could have to kill a 7-year-old. It's just none out there that you can explain to me why this would happen. I mean, this is family members that he went after. After Blake Road, Moore got back in his brother's stolen truck and drove to the next location. Moore drove to a church. Not to find help. Not to turn himself in. He drove to the Apostolic Church of the Lord Jesus, a small white-frame church in Cedar Bluff with ties to his own family. On the church grounds was a small residence where the pastor and his brother stayed on weekends when they traveled from Columbus to serve the congregation. That is what they did regularly. They made that drive to be there for the people of that community. On the night of January 9th, Reverend Barry Bradley and his brother Samuel Bradley were in that residence. Moore broke in and shot both of them. Reverend Barry Bradley and Samuel Bradley were each found with fatal gunshot wounds to the head. He then took one of their vehicles and drove away from the church, his 3rd stolen vehicle of the night. By this point, law enforcement from across the entire state was responding. The Mississippi Highway Patrol, the U.S. Marshals, the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation, the Mississippi Bureau of Narcotics, local deputies, all of them flooding into the rural roads of Clay County, looking for a man who had now killed 6 people across 3 separate locations. At 11:24 in the evening, exactly 4.5 hours after that first 911 call, officers at a roadblock on Pine Grove Road and Joe Myers Road stopped a vehicle matching the description of the one taken from the church. Darica Moore was behind the wheel. He was carrying both a rifle and a handgun when they took him into custody. He did not fight. He did not run. He surrendered without a struggle. 6 people were dead. A mother had just watched her daughter die. Had survived things no child should ever have to survive. 2 brothers who had given their weekend to serve a congregation would never make that drive from Columbus again. And just like that, on a cold dirt road in western Clay County, it was over.
New tonight, 6 people are dead after a man's alleged shooting spree overnight in Mississippi. Our Alex Perche is tracking this story for us. Alex, what do we know about how this all unfolded?
Well, I can tell you that investigators there in Clark County, Mississippi, are saying that this is one of the worst mass shootings in state history. What we're learning is that 24-year-old Darica Moore is their suspect. They say that last night around 7 p.m., they first got their the first 911 call. They say that Moore allegedly shot his father, Glenn, his older brother, Quentin, and then also his uncle before stealing his brother's truck, driving over to another home where they say that he tried to sexually assault a 7-year-old before killing that young girl, and then left to another home where they say he shot and killed 2 brothers. Again, I mean, this is fast developing. They're saying these details are still kind of coming in. They don't know a motive right now, but they say that he was apprehended without incident at a checkpoint that they had set up for public safety around that area. But earlier today, we heard from the district attorney, who again said that this is one of the worst crimes he's ever seen. Take a listen.
There's some cases just that they've got to get the worst punishment. They've got to get the worst punishment. If he's eligible, we're going to go for the death penalty.
Yeah, and I mean, you hear it there, but just to put this in context, we track a lot of this stuff through the Gun Violence Archive, and so far, thus far in 2026, this is the deadliest mass shooting in America.
This case is pretty recent at the time of this recording, so there is not much official information yet. But because the gravity of what happened in Cedar Bluff is unlike almost anything Mississippi has seen in recent memory, a lot of people have been weighing in publicly, trying to make sense of something that, honestly, defies easy explanation. One person on YouTube who garnered significant views summed up the public mood pretty accurately. He described Moore as someone like a ticking time bomb, a person who had been carrying something heavy for a long time, invisible to everyone around him, until it finally exploded. That reaction, as unscientific as it is, reflects exactly what thousands of people watching this case have been feeling. But let's talk about what this might actually come down to. When you look at everything we know, the age, the complete absence of any prior criminal record, the fact that nobody saw this coming, not his neighbors, not his community, not even the law enforcement officers who patrolled those same roads, the picture that starts to form is of someone who was struggling deeply on the inside while appearing completely fine on the outside. 24 is a significant age. Researchers who study mental health have consistently found that serious psychiatric conditions, the kind that involve paranoid thinking, breaks from reality, and beliefs that the people closest to you are a threat, tend to emerge in men for the very first time in their early to mid-20s. It is entirely possible that whatever was happening inside Derica Moore had never been seen, diagnosed, or treated, not because nobody cared, but because in small rural communities like Cedar Bluff, mental health resources are hard to find and even harder to access. There is also still a very real stigma around seeking help, particularly for young men, that stops people from ever raising their hand and saying something is wrong. The other thing worth sitting with is the fact that every single person Moore allegedly targeted that night was connected to him. This was not random. He did not drive to a stranger's neighborhood. He went to his father's house. He went to his cousin's house. He went to a church tied to his own family. That tells you something. Whatever was driving that evening, it was deeply personal. It was rooted in something close to him. In relationships, in history, in whatever had been quietly building inside those family connections for however long. Whether that was undiagnosed mental illness, years of buried pain that finally broke through, or something specific that happened that day that we still do not know about, the truth is, we cannot say for certain yet. But here is what we have to be clear about. None of this justifies what he allegedly did, not even close. There are countless young men out there who have grown up with far less, who have faced real poverty, real trauma, real hardship, things far worse than anything we know about Derica Moore's background. And they never picked up a weapon and turned it on their own family. They never harmed anyone. They found a way through. So whatever Moore was carrying, it does not explain away 6 lives lost. It does not explain away a 7-year-old girl who will never get to grow up. Struggle is real. Pain is real. But it is never, ever a reason for this. As of the time this video was recorded, a specific trial date for Derica Moore had not yet been set publicly. What we do know is that Moore made his first court appearance on Monday, January 13, 2026, just 4 days after the shootings. He was appointed a public defender and entered a plea of not guilty. At that point, he was charged with first-degree murder, with prosecutors confirming that an upgrade to capital murder charges, with individual counts for each of the 6 victims, was coming. District Attorney Scott Collum has already made his intentions crystal clear. He is pursuing the death penalty. So what can we expect when this case finally does go to trial? First, expect it to take time. Capital murder cases in Mississippi are among the most complex in the entire legal system. The defense will almost certainly request psychiatric evaluations to examine Moore's mental state, both at the time of the crime and in the present day. That process alone can take months. There will be pre-trial motions, requests for delays, and a discovery process that covers 3 separate crime scenes and the work of multiple law enforcement agencies. None of that moves quickly. Second, expect the motive to finally come out. Whatever Moore said in his post-arrest interviews, whatever investigators have pieced together about what happened inside that family before January 9th, all of that will be presented in court. That is the moment most people following this case are waiting for, the why that has been sitting unanswered since the night of January 9th, 2026. Third, expect the prosecution to build their case around the most serious possible charges, 6 victims. Girl among them, an attempted multiple stolen vehicles, multiple locations. The evidence, by all public accounts, is extensive. When that trial happens, we will be covering it. Every significant development, every detail that helps bring the full picture into focus. Until then, the families of Glenn Moore, Quinton Moore, Willie Ed Gins, Makilia Guinness, Reverend Barry Bradley, and Samuel Bradley are left waiting for a justice system to do what it is supposed to do, and hoping it does not take too long to get there.